E, 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 E. E. One, two.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome back for our afternoon session. So, this session will mainly focus around coral conservation. Sorry for that. So, as I was saying, this session will be mainly focused around coral conservation and protection, financing, and its subsequent economic benefits. Before we go further, I would like to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. So, as I call you, please take your seat to the front. So, we have Mr. Rodney Bourne from the Seychelles Parks and Gardens Authority as the moderator. We have Mr. Derge Romain from UNDP, Dr. Anna Costa from SIF, Mrs. Gilbert Gendron from B Ecology Consultant, Mr. Pramod Shuman from UNDP, and Ms. Pip Penny from Wise Oceans. Thank you, panelists. So, it is a known fact that climate change is real and that it is happening as we speak. And as a small island state, we are inevitably also suffering its effect. As a small island, we need to find adaptive ways and measures to face this natural phenomenon and to learn to live and adapt with its effect. Believe it or not, but climate change will have an impact on all aspects of our life, social, personal, and professional. The Seychelles Parks and Gardens Authority today will touch base on some of the ways in which mitigation strategies can be devised and how we, as a conservation authority, are doing our crucial part in ensuring that we are helping. The Seychelles Islands economy is 75% independent on tourism industry, and based off latest statistics and research, it has proven that tourists mainly visit Seychelles for our natural resources such as flora, fauna, underwater life, and terrestrial attractions. The corals that inhabit our oceans are one of the most loved attractions which tourists anticipate to see when they visit the islands, especially the marine parks. Hence, all the work that are being showcased today are working towards the benefit of our economy. Secondly, the outplanting of corals to help degraded reefs result in more nutrition for fish and other species, which in turn enriches our blue economy and therefore has a direct impact on our fisheries industry, which is also a growing industry in our economy. As a small island state, we also benefit from a number of grants which large international pro-conservation entities are eager to share to the countries as support to deal with and attempt to overcome this natural saga. The authority is no exception for coral project. The authority is no exception to this, and we also benefit from numerous amounts of grants for coral projects. However, SPGA is an authority that even after the completion of projects and the funding stops, the authority can assure the continuity of the said activity, and we also have an internal plan to ensure follow-through and success stories. With that, I would like to now invite our very own research scientist, Ms. Sophie Belloy, to briefly provide more information on the different projects which have been undertaken so far with regards to coral conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy, for giving us a bit of background about the financial side of things. Again, like she said, I'll be briefing you about the several projects SPG has undertaken over the past few years in regards to coral reef conservation and restoration. So in 2015, SPGA, or SNPA at the time, initiated the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Project, managed by UNEP and funded by the European Commission. The primary objective of this project was to rehabilitate two sites around Praslin that were severely affected by the 1998 and 2016 bleaching event, and in doing so demonstrate the viability of coral reef restoration within this area. This project helped to restore degraded reef sites at Amitié, as well as at Anspapay and Saint-Pierre in Curieux Marine Park. This was achieved using a combination of rope, metal frame, and wire mesh nurseries. But while the project had several successes, it also faced a few challenges. For one, it became clear that project timelines are often written under the assumption that restoration work can happen continuously throughout the year, which is rarely true. We know that monsoons generate a lot of rough weather and rough sea conditions, and as a result, field work often has to be reduced or even halted completely for months at a time. And this, of course, affects project outputs. We now know that the locations of nurseries and restoration sites need to be chosen strategically, ideally having two located on opposite sides of an island. Furthermore, environmental factors such as pollution or El Niño events are rather unpredictable, but they can have devastating impacts on project outputs, not only on the natural reefs, but also on our nurseries and restoration sites. For example, a single bleaching event can wipe out months' worth of restoration work within just a few weeks. So we now know that these constraints need to be considered when planning out a project as well as when evaluating its successes. Something else that was made clear during the EBA project was that an endeavor as long-term as coral reef restoration simply cannot be evaluated on a 1 or 2 year time frame. Considering the slow growth and recovery rates of coral reef ecosystems, it is evident that such projects need to be adopted on at least a timescale of 5 years. And fortunately, that is what we are seeing with most coral restoration projects today. Moving on to what we are currently doing at SPGA, our primary coral reef restoration work at the moment is happening within the Curieux Marine Park. This is a project funded by the Adaptation Fund and managed by UNDP. It was initiated in 2020 and will run until 2026 with the long-term goal of mitigating the impacts of climate change on local communities and coral reef-dependent economic sectors. Since the project began, SPGA has successfully cultured and outplanted over 4,000 corals through the use of rope nurseries, fish trap nurseries, metal reef stars, and metal rebars. And in January, we hosted a mass outplanting event with 2 prana-based dive centers, and over a 2-day period, we outplanted over 600 corals. We also initiated a marine temperature study at the start of this year. We deployed several temperature loggers across both shallow and relatively deep sites across all 5 marine parks. And worryingly, temperatures in most of these marine parks have already surpassed 30.5 degrees Celsius, and considerable levels of bleaching are already being reported. Ideally, all of this information will help inform us in future coral reef restoration work, as we will be better able to identify areas that are worse affected, potentially resilient sites, as well as thermal refuges, which is where temperatures remain relatively low compared to other locations. Last but not least, this year SPGA has undertaken the GEF7 project, also managed by UNDP. Our primary aim in this project is to mitigate the negative impacts of tourism on the coral reefs in the Setan and Île Coco marine parks, and in turn benefit the local communities living nearby. I'm sure all of our partners here today have seen firsthand the damage inappropriate anchoring practices can do to our natural reefs, as well as our nurseries and restoration sites. Therefore, we aim to install several eco-mooring buoys in all of the marine parks in the next year or so. We hope to see a considerable decline in the number of corals being physically damaged, especially in Setan Marine Park, where this seems to be a major issue. Thank you all for listening. I will now pass you on to Rodney, who will lead the next panel discussion.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everybody present. A warm welcome to the audience that's in the room, and our warmest panel here today. So I hope it's going to be an interesting debate and talk, and so it's going to be a dialogue. Again, my name is Rodney Bourne. I'm from SPGA. I'm currently work with the research department, so I'm going to facilitate the debate today. So I will try to pass the mic, or just to get to know the member of the panel before we actually address our theme for today. So we have two themes for today. One of the theme is about the financing of the restoration and protections of coral, and the other one is about the sustainable tourism. So as we are all aware that Seychelles are recording a lot of tourism that's coming to the country. And with this, we have a lot of NGOs and other organizations that are actually working to help and to contribute. So on the panel here, we have UNDP present. So before I proceed, I would like to the audience to get to know the background and the name. So we start with Gilbert, and then we go around the room with this space.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gilbert Gendron, presently working as an independent consultant for Ecological Consulting. And I used to work for SPGA for several years, so I really understand the context of the coral issues they are facing now, and I've been involved with some of the projects they've mentioned as well.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me on the panel. So my name is Pramod Kumar Chaman. I'm the Regional Project Manager for the Coral Restoration Project at the UNDP.
Hello, everyone. Now it works.
Hello.
My name is Anna Köster. I'm working with the Seychelles Islands Foundation. I'm the marine researcher on Adara Atoll, and I'm leading the marine monitoring activities with SRF on the atoll.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Pip Penny. I work for Wise Oceans. We're based at different resorts around Seychelles. I personally am based at Four Seasons. We run reef restoration projects as well as education and awareness.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dejume. Like Ms. Berry was mentioning, I used to work on the pilot project in 2015 when they first started to build the nurseries on Kyrios. I'm currently working with UNDP as a national project coordinator for the Coral Restoration Project, working with all three partners, SPGA, SNPE, and SPGA, MCSS, and Nature Seychelles. Thanks.
Okay, it seems that we have a good group of panelists here today. Just to start, on the theme for today, the first theme is sustainable tourism. As I previously mentioned, Seychelles have a lot of tourists that come to us for our environment, for the beauty we have in terms of the forest, the beaches, and snorkeling and going about. The first question I will try to address for Penny, due to the fact that you're working with some hotels. So what do you think the role of tourism in supporting and protecting coral reef?
I think it plays a massive role. Like you said, for us, we're only based at resorts. It's incredibly useful for us to have those partnerships. It allows us to have continued funding, which I'm sure everyone is aware is well, we're going to talk about that a bit later, but it's a really big deal to have the consistency in the funding and know that, next year we're still going to be able to do our work. As you said, people come to the Seychelles because of the amazing natural environment, because of the underwater world, the beautiful beaches. So it's within resorts' best interests to help protect these, to keep bringing people in, especially as tourism becomes more popular. We're facing more issues globally, climate change, everything, right? Pollution, all those kinds of things. So it's becoming even more important to have this sort of restoration and different projects in place. So I think resorts can be super useful. We get a lot of revenue, which allows us to do what we do. We get support in terms of things we need, even just, new nursery frame can be helped and help to be built by the resort, things like that. So I think that tourism can play a huge role as long as it's done in the right way, which again is another reason why we are there doing what we're doing. We have our physical restoration projects, which is really, really important, but we're also there for education and awareness. So we do talks, we do workshops, things like this with guests. And we always get such great feedback, and I think it's within Resort's best interest also. They get lots of great comments about sort of conversations with us and things like that, and I think it also increases their sort of brand, just how their brand is viewed, right? If they have the sustainability aspect, if they're looking after the environment that they're sort of exploiting, if they seem to be looking after it as well, then I think that really, really helps. So for us as an organization, we wouldn't exist without tourism industry. So for us, it's super important.
So then, that's mean you think that tourism have a vital role in protecting the reefs. I will try to address Anna, Dr. Anna, because I know Aldabra is doing a lot of jobs, good research on corals and all. So do you have a lot of vessels that come, and what activity that you do in terms of the tourism industry try to help the coral reef?
Yeah, so we do get tourists coming to Aldabra on cruise ships, but they themselves as such are not involved in the direct monitoring we do. However, obviously their visits and their impact fees help us a lot to fund what we do on Aldabra. So not just the reef monitoring, but all the monitoring we do on the atoll. And on top of that, SAF is not only managing Aldabra, it's also managing the Valle de Mai and the Font Ferdinand. So the entrance fees of those sites are very important also, and help us in funding the operations at Aldabra, which obviously is a very, very difficult site to manage and to run because it is very far away, which makes it so special, but makes it also very difficult.
You know, this topic actually is really interesting because not only Wise Ocean and Aldabra, SIF, that have tourism that actually contribute to the. Actually, SPG as well have a lot of boats and vessels that come to visit the environment. So my next question is to you, sir, because I don't know if you've been in Seychelles before, and I know you've been, definitely, obviously. But what do you see the impact of the tourism in terms of the environment, and what more can Seychelles do towards, or UNDP can aid towards protection of the corals?
So I think in some of, look, the tourism industry has a certain pressure on the environment also. So let's be honest, whatever touristic activity is done as a hotel or any activity at the sea has an impact on the environment. Okay, it's an additional pressure on what is already happening in terms of climate change. So I think it's also fair enough to rope in the tourism sector to try to bring in their contribution in terms of restoring those fragile ecosystems. Okay, so I think also talking from experience, Seychelles actually is a bit more advanced of how these the tourism sector is roped into these environmental projects and environmental preservation projects. So, but bearing in mind that, as I said, they also have an impact. So, at what point do you judge the impact that they have and the contribution they make? So, is it enough, you know, to counter that negative impact that comes with the addition of human pressure? But I think it's a good step. It's going in a good way, even in Seychelles and regionally, I would say. So the tourism sector has to be held more accountable in that, and they should come up with more support financially or logistically in whatever way to try to invest in conservation projects. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have those beautiful coral reefs, you won't have the same amount of tourism that comes to the country. So the other side of it is like COVID gave us a good idea of if there's no tourists coming to the country, it has an economic and social aspect, impact, but also it shows you the pressure that is relieved from the environmental ecosystem. So what we've seen that during COVID, there was a certain better, let's say, the environment could breathe a little bit. So as I said, there's two sides of things. There is the negative side, but the positive side also is that there is some good relationship that has been built between different organizations and the tourism sector. And the more we rope them in, the more we can have this funding mechanism to actually support the conservation projects in Seychelles and regionally also. Okay, so if I'm understanding more clearly, due to the fact that we have more hotels, and if the audience and the people listening to us this morning, the panelists before was explaining about the effect of the warmth of the ocean and the effect they have on the corals. So, Ms. Gilbert, due to the fact that you were previously worked with SPGA before in the research department and now you're freelance, so what do you think? You think that the tourism industry or the hotels that basically depend on the clients that goes to snorkeling and using the ocean, but do you think they should contribute more, especially now that we are facing the coral bleaching?
Yes, definitely, Rodney. I would say that some hotels are actually doing a lot and they are outstanding, but there are many others that could do better. There are some hotels which actually is not involved at all in like conservation activities. Maybe this should be an avenue that the Ministry of Tourism might consider to kind of frame that better through the eco-labels and things like that. I think the impact of tourism actually just goes beyond the fact that you've got tourists coming to Seychelles going snorkeling or diving. There's also the aspect of a lot of tourists coming to Seychelles because they want to have fresh fish, and a lot of them want like a fish that's the size of their plate so they can eat the whole fish. And a lot of time, these fish species that you would have one grilled fish would be parrotfish or a lot of the reef species. So it's kind of a very indirect pressure that a lot of times we tend to neglect. But it's not just the actual direct impact. I think it's got to do a lot more with the sustainability of what the hotel does, what it gives the client, and where it's sourcing, for example, the fish and other marine resources as well. And I think there should be a mechanism to kind of counterbalance this, because we're playing in a very difficult situation, because the tourism in Seychelles is based on the environment, and at the same time, it's the tourism that's putting a lot of pressure on the environment. So we need to be extra careful so we don't tip the balance.
You know, Gilbert, you actually have mentioned a very good point, especially about the sustainability and how the tourism industry and maybe hotels should be more aware of how important, not only now we're on the Coral Festival, we're talking about the corals, but actually how the importance of the environment are, especially for clients that come to actually observe and experience it for themselves. So in the next question goes out to Dej. Due to the fact that you've worked before on coral restorations and SPGA, and now you are project coordinator at UNDP. So what are the mechanisms and what are the ways that you think the hotels should maybe contribute, or the tourism industry should contribute towards the health of the coral?
Thank you for your question. Actually, we have a pretty good example here. Wise Ocean, they already working with hotels, and they actually have a good range of offerings that they offer the clients directly. What was it, like honeymoon, planting your coral for your honeymoon? And
yeah, exactly. Guests can get involved with the restoration hands-on. They can learn about it. We can show them the nurseries. But as you said, we do special activities. Love Grows Beautiful Things, honeymoons, all kind of tailored activities that get people involved, learning about it, and then also hands-on experience, which is a great chance for us to educate them, as well as them getting something out of it as well.
So I will think like maybe a hotel, they're not totally aware of how to get towards the conservation needs. But it's a good opportunity to reach out to the NGOs, MCSS, Nature Seychelles, SPGA. We have parks which are already in hotels which are already in the parks. If they don't have the know-how, we have a lot of conservation or society organizations in Seychelles. This is one way they could really step into conservation. So that's the way I'll say.
Very, very good. One interesting thing as well that we need to talk about, this we cannot talk about, but we need to talk about, is the ecotourism. Dr. Anna, what do you think about ecotourism, especially now that we are facing coral bleaching? So do you think it's a good idea? Should we have more people or more NGOs venturing it? And so just tell me what you think about it.
I mean, generally, ecotourism sounds really good. It's just, I guess, a matter of how you define it, what is really meant by it, and how you can implement it and then make sure it's sustainable in the long run. So it really, it really depends on that type of definition. And I think generally, it can all be good and well, but it really needs that level of dedication and pushing through and really meaning it and not just greenwashing. I have to admit that I don't have a very good idea of what the general landscape of ecotourism is in Seychelles and what the perception of that is. But it should go beyond, putting signs up or, I don't know, educating people. It has to go a little bit further than that. And that, I believe, takes a big step for tourism establishments, for hotels. It takes quite some investments. I guess, and for sure there are some international standards that could be followed, so that there are examples out there that can be followed. And really, I think the most important bit is that it's being taken very, very serious and that you follow through with it and make sure it really leads to something that is better than the current status.
So just another question. So is SIFR conducted any ecotourism that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think that's where it goes back to how do you define ecotourism? What do you mean with that? So that's very difficult for me to answer without making sure that we have the same understanding of what ecotourism is. What we do at SIF, we have the Vallée des Mets, the Front Ferdinand, people can visit there. We take them around on tours, we educate them. Obviously, we want to make sure that we don't have negative impacts on that. So we do monitoring projects to track that. On Aldabra Atoll, we are very limited in what we can, provide, simply because we don't have a lot of people on the station that can take care of those tourists. But also on Aldabra, we have specific locations where people are only allowed to go to make sure they don't have that impact that we fear could have a negative influence on the atoll and the species and the sustainability on that place. So I think, at least for us on Aldabra, we are very confined in what we can allow to happen, simply because of the current setup.
Actually, you have made a nice point by telling how you define ecotourism. Actually, just to add to a fact that in 2003, Seychelles has recorded 350 or nearly there amount of visitors that's come to Seychelles. So do you think the amount of visitors that come to Seychelles in terms, I don't know, of current capacity, so do you think there will be an impact? And do you think that people from abroad, when they come, tourists come to experience the environment, because, when you go to such places, for example, you just want to go to a certain island and you go there or a certain beach, you find there's loads of tourists there. So do you think there will be an impact in terms of the amount of tourists that Seychelles, the record that they have on the ecotourism or the tourism industry?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So on a purely economic side of things, more tourism is always beneficial for the country, okay? But as you said, there's a carrying capacity, if you can put it as that, for islands, ecosystems, and look, as you said, the impact of one boat in an area compared to 100 boats is not the same. Of course, and it's not exponential. It's not like there is a limit, a threshold at some point that you will see that after that threshold, there is a real impact on the ecosystem. So this is where you have to find the balance, as been mentioned before. More tourism is, of course, economically very beneficial, but the negative impact of it also, at some point, will come back. It's a cycle, because if your ecosystem is degraded of you trying to push more tourism, you get back at the base that you can't actually, you won't have so many tourists because you're losing your ecosystem, which is your best selling point. So it's always having to find the right balance, trying to know what is your limit and what is the threshold, what is the carrying capacity. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it is something that we have to be very, very careful in terms, because of course everybody wants to have that economic progress, the business runs, people's life or livelihood are getting benefit out of this, but if we don't take care about the impact on the ecosystem, at some point there will be a collapse, because we are in a certain climate change also is there, so there are other factors already putting pressure on the ecosystem. So this is also will have a combined effect, and probably we have to be very, very careful on that.
Thank you. Ms. Jadon, I know you have a consultant. So tell me something. In terms of the tourism industry, do you think there's enough funding, not funding, but enough NGOs or people within the industry that can help towards using the tourism fund and help the reef, especially the coral reef? And the impact, will there be any impact on the tourism, especially that we are facing coral bleaching now?
Okay, will I answer your last question first? So I think definitely there would be an impact on tourism. Coral bleaching will definitely have an impact on tourism, because like if we have all the corals that dies out like in 1998, definitely there's a lot of clients coming to Seychelles just for diving, snorkeling, so they would probably go elsewhere where they still have a lot of corals and other nice marine life. But also, we talking about ecotourism, we having a focus on the hotels and things like that. But there's another aspect of tourism, which is basically the local entrepreneurs actually offering services to tourists as well. It's not just the hotels, but like the boat charters, boat operators, yacht charters. So we all know we have issues with bare boats in Seychelles. The tourist comes from abroad, they rent a boat, they going into marine parks or even outside of marine parks, they are dropping out down their anchor onto coral reef. And the sad thing is, even like small charters that's taking clients to the park to snorkel on a coral reef, they actually putting down their anchor on that same reef where the client is going to snorkel. So I think we have a more of a problem there. It's a grassroots problem, really, on the local level with the small entrepreneurs that we need to focus on as well, because it's a lot of tiny bits and pieces here and there. When you put it together, it have a very big impact, actually. And you can have one big hotel, everybody is seeing this big building, and you're saying it's a mass development, but maybe that hotel is doing a lot to actually have limited impact. You see what I mean? And then, of course, they have more of the funding, so the little boat charters, they won't have that much funding to actually put back into restoring the area they're degrading.
Actually, that's tying well with the next theme for today, is about the financing for coral protection. JB has actually mentioned about other entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs there is room for them to venture in with the tourism industry, especially with the ecotourism. So due to the fact that you work with UNDP, do you think, is there enough funding for, I don't know if you may be aware of, but do you think there's enough funding for small businesses that actually wants to venture in such a business? What's your thoughts?
So yes, funding is actually one of the biggest issue in coral restoration, because when you're restoring coral, it's a long-term initiative. You know, you have to do your research, you have materials, you have equipment, you have labor. So it's like mentioned before, it's not just a 3-year project. It might go on to 5-year, 10-year. So even as a small agency, probably you have to ensure you are able to follow up with your actions that you begin with. So it's money, it's like I mentioned, labor. Your question was, is there enough? So with the partners we're working with, most often it's not enough. You know, we've developed the project, it takes some time, and then we initiate it. But there's so many issues, like now we're having the coral bleaching. So how do we adapt to that? Do we need to inject more fund to move forward? So it's I would say it's almost never enough. But yeah, the partners keep finding innovative way to use what they have, and also try to find other means of acquiring funds. It's a tough battle to secure the funds. Yeah.
Actually, as you mentioned, money for any project is never enough, right? So, but do you think, due to Wise Ocean, actually you are an organization, NGOs, so do you think there's enough funding for any NGOs, entrepreneurs? Well, it's locally as well in Seychelles, but I know abroad also at same times. So do you think there's enough funding for any people that want to venture in?
I think it's better now. I think coral reefs are generally a very undervalued ecosystem, or have been in the past, and therefore funding has also been incredibly low or less than what it should be. I think that is changing, and there is a lot more funding, especially in the Seychelles. In recent years, there has been a lot more on offer. I'd have to agree with the never enough statement. I think we're all in agreement, everyone here, that reef restoration is incredibly important, and there does need to be a lot more investment into that. It's not something we deal with a lot at Wise Oceans, so I can't speak for other organizations that have to go out and apply for funding. Of course, there are issues with any funding, with any kind of environmental thing, especially coral restoration. You know, there's different aspects that are maybe not thought of with other kinds of environmental grants. For example, when there's coral bleaching, like now, we still have the target, you know, you're going to get your grant, you'll get the funds if you outplant 1,000 corals this year. That's great, but actually we can't do any restoration for 5 months because of the bleaching and things like that. So I think there needs to be maybe a little bit more specific funding for restoration rather than just environmental grants that could go anywhere, could go to any kind of project. I think more specific funding would be great that maybe takes into account the nuances of underwater, especially coral reef restoration. It's never enough, I think, is the kind of overall point there.
So it's interesting because I know funding is a major issue, but we wish we could have somebody from SICAD here today because we know that SICAD is one of the funders that fund various themes. And I know UNDP as well, some funding. But Dr. Anna, tell me, what are the means and ways that SIF or they tap into the funding? Is it from they wait only on SICAD or UNDP, or they just try to mobilize some money internally?
So some of it is obviously also financed internally. So a lot of our standard monitoring that we've been running for several years is funded internally through whatever we get from tourism in the Vallée des Mets, also at Adaba Atoll. But actually we have a whole projects team at the head office, and they are running projects that are funded through external funders. So that includes SECAD, for example, but also international funders from elsewhere. And we do regularly apply for funding for specific targeted projects that, you know, we have in bite-sized chunks for several years at a time. What we identify can help us in improving certain aspects of our monitoring, or improving certain aspects of making sure that, you know, things are safeguarded better, or improving communication systems we have. So there's several types that we get funded through external funders, but then obviously it actually takes that workforce that we have and that we need to make sure that we can apply for the funding, but then also that when we get it, to follow the whole procedure, to do the reporting, to actually meet our objectives that we set out initially. So yeah, it is several people within the organization that are involved in this kind of project appraisal and very important for SIF as well.
So Mike, thank you for the. But my question is, I don't know who will actually want to answer this one. So my question is, what will happen to the NGOs or the organizations and even the funders that fund a coral project, especially for long term? But like now, we are facing coral bleaching. So what will happen if the funders, the organizations are actually working? So what will happen to them if they come up and said, I know you have two representative for UNDP. So my question is, what will happen actually if the organization comes, implementing partners come and said, look, we're having a problem that we cannot meet the quotas, or so what will happen?
Actually, which is a bit beyond the control of the implementers. I mentioned earlier to have nurseries in different depths, to have, for example, having shed cloths, just find other sort of adaptation to try and mitigate the impact that the bleaching will have on the project itself. And maybe just to add on a little bit in terms of financing as well, I think in Seychelles we use a lot to grants funding. So there's grant proposals, you write your project, you get the money, you do your project, and then you move on to applying on another project, and it goes on like that. But I believe that the financing landscape is changing, and now you have funders who's more opting into financing projects whereby the organization or the individual also co-finances, even if it's not a big finance that they need to add to what they're being given. But one other aspect also is they are requested to have activities that will actually generate income so that it can be sustainable in the long term. I think the financing side of things is going towards sustainable financing. We give a bit of money, but you need to actually raise funds to keep the project going as well. So.
But do you think, Jobert, do you think there's enough funder towards such initiatives?
I think there are. Maybe we don't know all of them, and a lot of times it's the due diligence and what you actually need to do to get these funds that tend to put organization off a little bit, because it requires a lot of work, it requires a lot of reporting, and it's at times overwhelming for the amount of staff that organizations, especially like small NGOs, actually have. But if you've got robust organization with a qualified person, enough personals, I don't think it's a problem actually.
So Dej, just to go back, tell me, what advice will you give to an organization that depend actually on the funding for the life of long of the project, especially towards the conservation of coral reef? So what advice you would give them, especially in the face of this particular event?
Yes, that's a tough question. Because, yes, a lot of those projects are actually facing this right now. And we are actually working with them to try to find the best way to adapt to the situation. So it's a learning thing going on right now. Advice, most of the time they will actually know more than myself or UNDP. They will be telling us how they can adapt, and yes, and the project just needs to see how it also can adapt to the proposal that's been brought forward. Yeah.
Well, I'll just, so from the beginning, as I think there's a real concern of meeting project quotas and targets. So I think most of the time we are fixated on the numbers and figures, like we need to restore X amount of hectares of this. I understand that with the challenges that came in with El Nino, probably the people working in those and are answerable for the funds that is being given, there's a real concern about achieving these targets. So we have to remember also that the project, like this project, is also about lessons learned. Okay, it's not only about the final amount that hitting that target. It's also a journey of learning. Also, what are the best ways? What are the risks? And also how to adapt to that. So, not meeting the final target is not a complete failure if it's documented well and we scientifically can back up whatever happened. And it's always a lesson learned. This is science. People build up from what previous have learned also. So it's also a way of probably doing it better next time and acting better, putting more contingency plan, finding more scientific technical aspect of the project that probably we can mitigate some of the risk factors. But let's say these risk factors that we're talking right now are extreme events, okay? It's not, because of climate change, it's more recurrent, but it doesn't happen frequently, okay? But there are ways that we have to actually adapt and learn from this and I think NGOs or any other organization working on coral restoration, especially ocean-based coral restoration, have to know that this is the risk that we are taking when we are doing ocean-based restoration. So we are not in control of the environment. We can control all the other factors, okay? The less human pressure, less traffic, boat fishing activities, the best flush rate, the best pH temperature, but you don't control this like you do on a land-based nursery or something like that. So it's a learning curve and something that we have to keep in mind when organizations working towards coral restoration. The second thing about funding also, funding, let's say, has been mentioned, usually the funding amount, the amount that is being entrusted to you, is also a certain responsibility that's expected from the NGO or organization. So the higher the amount, the higher the scrutiny and criteria for you to be able to access it, which is, I think, quite fair, okay? Because you need a certain track record, you need a certain structure to be able to implement these funds. The advice I would give to organizations or entrepreneurs starting is to actually target the small funds in the beginning. The small funds are more lenient, the small amounts, I say, are more lenient in terms of criteria, and they give you the opportunity to build up your capacity. So again, as an organization, if you're starting, you don't have the human capacity, you don't have a structure, let's say the administrative structure, the finance structure. Those small grants help you actually to build this capacity. Don't expect like an organization that is very new to be able to access this big amount of funds. So build up from that, and then you will have the experience and capacity to access more funds. The second way of doing is collaborating, which I think is the best way. Okay, so there are funders, let's say, that have this criteria of actually having several organizations in the project. Okay, so this helps to split the risk and also helps to have a, let's say, regional and capacity building among different stakeholders. So these are ways actually that organization can try to, but it's, let's say, the bigger the amount, the more tedious is the job of applying to it, because the risk is higher.
So this is, thank you, well put. I think this is an advice for anybody that actually wants to venture in conservation. But because today we are in the Coral Festival, so any entrepreneur that wants to venture in coral reef restoration, so it should be wise to go towards a smaller grant first, to build capacity before you apply for the bigger one. Well put. But however, is Seychelles ready? I repeat this one. Is Seychelles ready for the bleaching event that will hit? And who will be the most, the person, or what will be, who the organization will be most affected? So I don't know if anyone can actually wants to answer this one.
If I understood correctly, so if Seychelles is ready for the bleaching, The honest answer is nobody's ready for a bleaching. Okay. You can choose your restoration site. I mean, I'm talking about active restoration, not already existing reef. So because existing reef is already there, there's very little things you can do except from reducing the human factor, the pressures from human factors. But if you're choosing your outplanting site, okay, you choose it according to the best criteria. But even doing all this, you are not actually, nobody's ready or prepared for a bleaching event. And bleaching is also an adaptive mechanism for corals, right? So basically, if everything is okay, there's no other external pressure, you expect resilient corals to come out more of this, and there's a diversity in the reef. What is happening now is because of X amount of pressures and combination of factors, it's not the normal process that being followed. So we are never ready for that. And who is most affected? I think for island states like Seychelles, everybody's affected because you are very much dependent on the ecosystem services of what the coral reef brings, which is quite consequent. So it's a chain effect. It trickles down, but even you think that you are not in the sector related to the coral reef, you think you'll not be affected, but you will be at the end of the day because everything is interlinked. So everybody's affected at the end of the day.
Well said. So Penny, have you started having any mechanism prepared already for the bleaching? Have you started working on any techniques or any,
The only thing we can really do is provide shading for the nurseries. It's obviously thermal stress is a large reason why the corals are bleaching, but it's also increased UV exposure. So we have sort of shading cloth that you would use in regular gardening, which we can put over the nurseries. We can't do anything about the temperature. We tried various things in 2016 in terms of moving the nurseries slightly deeper, things like that to try and get a little bit of a lower temperature. The only thing that really seems to work where we're working is the shading. That is sort of the only thing we can do. In terms of the natural reef, it's just a case of monitoring, surveying, keeping an eye on things, making sure we're collecting very frequent and very high quality data, just so we can assess. And at the end of the bleaching, which is hopefully soon, as was mentioned, we'll have the sort of more resilient corals that have fared a lot better. The corals that sort of died off obviously aren't as resilient, can't cope with the thermal stress. The ones that are left will then work very hard to keep the genetic diversity that we can while still focusing on the corals that did better during the bleaching. So we're monitoring for different corals, specific corals on the natural reef that are doing well, that haven't been affected. And this will definitely filter into our restoration going forwards in terms of the corals that have done well or obviously have that higher ability to cope with the thermal stress. And so they'll be the ones that will continue to propagate. And that's really all we can do on our sort of side of things.
And Dr. Anna, anything, and I know Aldabra is working a lot and do a lot of research. So how will this impact your team at Aldabra and actually impact Aldabra as a World Heritage Site?
I mean, the actual impact of the current bleaching event we don't know yet, obviously, and it's still going to take several months until we actually know the whole breadth of it. What we can definitely, or what we did learn from the last bleaching event, is we have a better idea of where we find the more resilient corals, the reefs that are recovering much faster, and expecting this bleaching event to happen. We actually started a collaboration with researchers in Oxford University, and she came out this season, and we utilized this bleaching event to really get into the depth of why some of the corals might be faring better than others, which is pretty lucky the way it worked out, that we were able to time it so well to be able to do that field work before and during the bleaching event, and use that natural event to actually learn something of the resilience of corals. There's obviously not anything we can do right now. I mean, we are in this sticky situation that we have a fourth coral bleaching event in a very short period of time because of global climate change, and that's the big problem we are in. And it isn't a surprising thing that we are in the 4th coral bleaching event now, and there's going to be a 5th, and there's going to be 6th and a 7th, and it's going to continue. And the frequency between those bleaching events is just going to become smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's why we want reef restoration to happen, to make sure that we somehow can, you know, keep those very, very important ecosystem services that reefs are providing to the people or to the whole country in Seychelles, but also globally. So yeah, it is only very little we can do right now. But looking ahead, we do have to reduce climate change or reduce global warming as much as we can. Reduce local stresses, that what you mentioned earlier. So we have to really protect the reefs on a local level so that they are not exposed to any of the other stresses that we can control. Reef restoration is one way of learning about coral reefs, of trying to, you know, have some areas that can provide those ecosystem services, but use it also as research opportunities. We can learn a lot from these projects, also when they're bleaching and also when a lot of the corals are dying, plus other research like things that we do on Aldabra, where we really look at how a reef that is so far away from any of the local human stresses, how those reefs are doing. And obviously sad at the end is going to be if we say, you know what, Aldabra's reefs, they're so far away and still they're bleaching really bad and we lost a lot of corals. I hope I don't say that at the end of the year, but it's too early to say now.
Very good. So one interesting thing is you mentioned about university, like research in terms of, for especially now with the coral bleaching. So do you think, I think I've mentioned this before, enough funders to fund for people actually now to go and venture for innovative ideas and try to protect corals? Do you think there's enough funders around, not only locally but globally? I know you've mentioned in Seychelles we have more, we have the CICAT, we have the UNDP. So what I'm saying is, and you have the Blue Economy Grant as well. So and then plus now you mentioned about the universities as well can provide grants for research. So do you think there's more that we can do to fund people towards finding innovative ideas, how to protect and to explore areas that we have not explored yet, especially towards the coral bleaching events that's happening? Jadon, any?
I think that it's very difficult to limit what's happening now because there's no way we can control the temperature. And like the others were saying, you just need to reduce the local drivers of degradation and then just hope that the corals will adapt and survive. And the best thing is to document actually a maximum what's happening so that we really understand in the future, towards the end of the year, like where corals survive, which species, like genera that we've lost, and how the reef is evolving, if there's a phase shift from a coral-dominated reef to algal-dominated reef, and things like that. And recently there were papers also published by April to show the whole coral highway within the region. So I think we just need to build on such research and continue documenting as well. And maybe a way forward for Seychelles is to have a national bleaching response plan, so that instead of individually each organization doing their own little monitoring on their side, but have a national movement, actually a collation of data and something more strategic on the national level. And I know in the region as well, like you have Cordio that's collecting data on bleaching. So to have this national mechanism already to have more robust data in Seychelles, but also to contribute to these larger platforms, it might also help for funding in the future and in forms of documentation and future publication and things like that.
So again, you raised some good points. You all are raising some really interesting points. So I hope everybody listening at home and anybody listening, wherever they are, so they could take some lesson. Because as we all are aware that the coral bleaching will not only affect only the people that restoring the coral or NGOs, but the whole of the countries, especially small island developing states. We have a lot of challenges and problems coming on their ways. because are we all aware there's various roles that corals play in the ecosystems. On top of that, in terms of fishermen going fishing, spots they used to fish, in terms of the amount of tourists that go to a particular spot for diving, snorkeling, the boat operators, even the tour guides, everybody will be affected some way or the other. So actually, like Ms. Jebe has already addressed, that we should have a national plan in place to address such challenges that we will be facing the coming weeks or months. But like we hope that the coral bleaching doesn't go much more than this, so that it stabilizes and then we go back to the way it is. Any last word before we proceed for any question? Dej, start with you.
Maybe I just add, like I've heard a lot of the mitigation measures been applied in Seychelles, lowering the nursery, moving the nursery out more into deeper waters, shading. Another exciting one which is upcoming with Nature Seychelles is actually building the land-based nursery. So then you can actually control your environment, and you have easy access to the corals. So people are getting innovative. So there's still hope. We just need to be more innovative, bring new ideas to the table, and so yeah, it's gonna be a big disaster coming. Well, we'll see how it goes, but there's still hope. Yeah.
Penny,
Yeah, just
any
to
last
follow
word?
on from that, I think that's really important. Sometimes working hands-on in the field, seeing the effects of bleaching every single day, sort of monitoring it literally week by week, seeing it getting worse, it can be quite disheartening and pretty awful. But I think leading on from that, it's really important to stay hopeful. You know, we are seeing corals that are doing well, the corals that are being completely unaffected. And I think from today and all the organizations here, it just shows how important the work that we're doing is, and just, yeah, trying to keep that faith and just keep going and just working on what we're doing is so important, and it's just becoming increasingly important. So just well done to everyone that's sort of doing anything to reduce these impacts. So thank you.
Any last word, Dr.
Yeah, maybe I don't think, you know, you don't need to be an expert or you don't need to be working in this field. If you go out and you go snorkeling and you see corals bleaching, go and report this. Talk to someone that you know that works in the field. Go online, report to Cordio. Report if you see bleaching, report if you don't see bleaching, which is very important. So everyone actually can contribute to this very, very crucial data collection on how bad this bleaching event actually is.
Any last words?
So yes, I think whatever is happening in terms of bleaching event and in terms of corals, there have always been prediction of reefs disappearing by 2030, by 2050. We still have corals, so they're still here. And on the optimistic side, I mean, corals are quite adaptive. They adapt very well to certain conditions. At what rate they're adapting, that's the question. So probably being a bit more optimistic, I will say that yes, there will be bleaching. We will still have reefs and corals. In what condition, in what state, and what diversity, this I can't say, but I hope that they will be still here for a long time.
Any last word, Ms. Jalo?
Okay, I think I would bounce back to what Anna was saying. It's very important to record bleaching and report bleaching, but also it's even more important to record where there's no bleaching, because these are the corals that will help us to move forward and then keep the coral reefs going in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so again, thank you for all the panelists that's here. Before we close, I just want to mention that actually CICAT now has opened grants for anybody who has innovative ideas in terms of trying to protect the coral reef, or who wants to venture in such a entrepreneur to aid us in terms towards protection of the coral reef. Again, thank you very much for all your thoughtful ideas, and have the best coral festival. So tomorrow we have another planting event. So hope to see you guys there at Polone. Again, thank you and have a pleasant day.